Shin and Guts are more similar than you think. And I know that sounds crazy at first. Guts is the struggler. When you talk about struggle in manga, he is usually the first name that comes to mind. His story is the story of pain, betrayal, and the refusal to die after the world has taken almost everything from him. Shin, on the other hand, gets viewed completely differently. He's stubborn, emotional, and constantly yelling about his dream of becoming the greatest general under the heavens. So it's easy to label him as a typical shonen protagonist, but I think reading the story like that is way too surface level, because Shin's dream was never just some childish desire. Shin and Hyou were slaves, orphans of the warring states. They were born into a world where people like them were meant to work, die, and be forgotten. The sword was their way out, their rebellion against a fate that said slaves were meant to stay slaves forever. And that's where Shin and Guts become way more similar than you realize. Both are protagonists defined by struggle against fate. Guts is the struggler who refuses to die after the world breaks him. Shin is the struggler who refuses to accept that the world has to stay broken. This is why Shin gets misunderstood so often. People judge his personality and ignore the origin of his dream. Yes, he is loud and obsessed with becoming the greatest general under the heavens. But that dream doesn't come from a place of comfort. It comes from necessity. From the very beginning of Kingdom, Shin and Hyou are immediately introduced as slaves of the warring states. They are not two kids living comfortably who randomly decide that they want to become strong because it sounds cool. They are born at the bottom of a world that has already dictated their future. And that already should change the meaning of Shin's dream in your mind. Because when someone like Shin says he wants to become a great general, it is more than just pride. It is a rejection of the fate that the world has prepared for him. The world says people like Shin are meant to work, die, and disappear. So Shin's dream becomes his way of saying a resounding no. That's why the sword matters so much. When Shin and Hyou decide to train with wooden swords, it isn't because the sword suits their fighting style. It's not because swords look cool. In their eyes, the sword is the only path. It is the only way out. Their dream is survival disguised as ambition. And Hyou makes that even clearer when he talks about the fate of a slave. Because to him, the most terrifying part is not just their lives as slaves now. It is that if they do nothing, that fate continues forever. Slaves go on to marry other slaves. Their children become slaves. And then their children's children become slaves. That is one of Kingdom's portrayals of fate. Not some magical prophecy, just reality. A world where your birth decides your entire life before you ever get to choose anything. So when Shin and Hyou dream of becoming great generals, all this is why their dream is not childish. It is a rebellion against a world designed to forget them. And that is also why Shin is not as simple as people make him out to be. Before he ever gets the chance to be branded as some loud shonen-esque protagonist, his dream is already rooted in something much more real. The struggle to escape a world that says people like him are meant to be forgotten. And that is where the comparison to Guts becomes interesting, because he also represents struggle, but in its most brutal form. Violence is not just something he experiences, it is the world that he was born into. And I mean that in the most literal way. Guts was born from a corpse, and from that moment, his life was immediately surrounded by violence. He was raised far from love, by mercenaries, where his body was the only thing that mattered. His struggle began before he had any real choice. And that is important, because Guts is not simply a character who fights because fighting is something he enjoys. Fighting is how he survives in a world with no other options. But what makes his struggle so painful is that every time he finds some form of bond, it is inevitably attacked by the world around him. The Band of the Hawk is the clearest example of this. At first, Guts does not even want to be there. He is forced to join after getting his ass handed to him by Griffith. But ironically, the place Guts did not want to belong became the first place where he found belonging. For someone who has spent so much of his life being treated solely as a weapon, the Band Band of the Hawk gave him something different: purpose, connection, the closest thing to family. So when the eclipse happens, the tragedy isn't just people dying, it is the destruction of the first place where Guts was truly loved. The eclipse is the ultimate proof of Guts' struggle because it attacks every part of him. It breaks him physically, taking away his eye and his arm. It breaks him emotionally, taking away his family and destroying his trust. And it breaks him mentally, taking away his dignity, violating the person he loved, and almost shattering his will to live. From that point on, Guts' struggle becomes more than survival on the battlefield. It becomes the struggle to just keep living at all, after the world has given him every reason not to. And that is why Guts is the struggler, because the world keeps trying to push him deeper into unimaginable violence and isolation, and he keeps refusing to die. But Shin's struggle is different. Shin's real struggle is not simply becoming a great general. It is having to chase that dream while being forced to confront the violence, hatred, and victims of the same war-torn world that gave birth to his dream. And it all starts with Hyou. Hyou's death is Shin's first real confrontation with the cruel reality of war, because Hyou wasn't only Shin's brother. He was the one who helped his dream take shape, the one who looked at their lives as slaves and said, "This ain't it." So when Hyou died, Shin didn't only lose someone he loved dearly, he was shown the truth of the world he lives in, that people at the bottom, no matter their talent, dreams, or potential, can still be used and discarded in an instant. Hyou had a dream, he had talent, he had a future, but to the world around him, he was just someone who could be used and thrown away. That is the first layer of Shin's struggle. But as Kingdom builds its story, that struggle becomes heavier, because Shin starts to see that war is more than winning duels, chasing glory in battle, and earning promotions. Sanyo is one of the clearest arcs when it comes to this, because this is where Shin is forced to confront the reality of invasion. It is not just two great generals clashing on the battlefield. Invasion means innocent civilians suffer. It means commanders have power over people who cannot defend themselves. It means the dream of becoming a great general exists inside a world where innocent people are constantly paying the price. And that matters because it means Shin, as an orphan of the warring states, is trying to rise through the very system that made him an orphan in the first place. This is why Mangoku is so important. He is the key to understanding Shin's struggle. He is the prime example of what war leaves behind when a victim survives with nothing but hatred. He is a dark mirror, what Shin could have become if he remained a child of war with nothing but that hatred. The difference is that Shin met people who drew him away from all that pain. Hyou gave him a dream, Sei gave that dream a larger purpose, and Kyokai 10 in the Heishin unit gave him bonds that turned his pain into direction. And that is what makes Shin's confrontation with Mangoku so powerful. He forces Shin to confront one of the central questions at the heart of Kingdom. Is this world doomed to keep producing more victims like Mangoku? And Shin's answer is no, not because he is naive, but because he understands the cruelty of war all too well, to accept it as inevitable. So Shin's struggle is way more than reaching the top. Reaching the top is simply a means to help create a world beyond the cruelty that made him want to climb in the first place. Now, this is where Shin and Guts are most similar, but also where they differ. By now, the connection is clear. Both are defined by struggle against fate, but their struggles move in different directions. Guts' struggle turns inward, while Shin's struggle turns outward. After the eclipse, Guts' struggle becomes personal survival and revenge. The world has broken him, and now he constantly faces the same question. How does he keep his humanity through all the rage, trauma, and vengeance? Guts' struggle is about surviving the broken world without being completely consumed by it. But Shin's struggle moves differently because as he grows, his dream grows. It becomes bigger than himself. It is no longer only about becoming the greatest general to change his own life. His dream becomes tied to Sei's quest of bringing an end to the warring states. In other words, Shin's personal dream starts to align with the larger direction of the world. And through moments like Sanyo, and more specifically, his confrontation with Kanki, Shin also starts to understand that becoming a great general isn't enough. It is about deciding what kind of great general he wants to become, and what kind of great general he refuses to become. Because that choice affects whether Shin becomes someone who repeats the cruelty that created people like Mangoku, or someone who fights against it. This is why Kanki matters so much for Shin. Kanki is a winner, there is no doubt about it, but he also represents the kind of great general Shin refuses to become. become. A great general who believes victory can justify almost anything, even cruelty to civilians. And for Shin, that is a direct challenge, because if his dream is to become a great general, then he has to ask himself what becoming a great general actually means. Is it only about victory or having the power to crush the enemy, or is it also about what kind of world your victories help create? That is why Shin becoming a general matters. His promotion to general is not only proof that he personally escaped the fate of a slave, it shows that his struggle has turned from inward to outward. The slave who was meant to be forgotten is now commanding tens of thousands of men. He is now the one giving others a place and purpose. He is becoming responsible for lives beyond his own, and that is a massive shift. Because young Shin wanted to escape the fate of being forgotten, but older Shin becomes someone capable of carrying people who might have been forgotten too. That is the difference between Shin's struggle and Guts' struggle. Guts is trying to survive after the world breaks him. Shin is trying to rise high enough to prove that the world does not have to stay broken, and that people like him do not have to be forgotten. And that is why this comparison matters. On the surface, Shin and Guts feel like completely different protagonists, but underneath all that, both characters are built on the same question. What do you do when the world has already decided what you were supposed to become? That is the real connection. Guts fights against the fate of being broken. Shin fights against the fate of being forgotten. And the difference is what their struggle becomes. Guts' struggle becomes the fight to survive a broken world without losing himself completely. Shin's struggle becomes the fight to rise high enough to show everyone that a broken world is not the future. So no, Shin and Guts are not the same character. Their pain is different, their worlds are different, and their journeys move in different directions. But I think that is exactly why Shin deserves to be talked about among the greatest seinen protagonists. Not because he is as dark as Guts, but because he is also built on struggle, fate, and the refusal to accept the world as it is. Their struggles may be different, but they are both strugglers. And that is why Shin and Guts are more similar than you think. If you made it to the end, thank you for tuning in. Let me know what you think of Shin and Guts in the comment section below. Also, it would mean a lot to me if you left a like, share this video with a friend, and subscribe for more videos like this.